Hello, welcome back, fabricators. We are back once again with another fabric tutorial. Today, Tommy's walking us through how to use a pipeline inside Fabric. This is equivalent to an Azure Data Factory pipeline, a little bit simplified and a little bit customized for what Fabric is doing, but essentially many of the same data engineering activities that we're using. Let's dive right in. Tommy, take us away.
All right, so we're actually going to use as well the tutorial that's on Microsoft's documentation on Fabric. And it's great to take a little bit of a change from our data flows and what we've been doing. So let's dive right in. I'm going to go into my workspace that's Fabric enabled, and I'm actually going to go to the bottom left here. And what I'm going to do is actually choose my data factory simple here, which is basically all the service we have available to us. From here, what I'm going to choose is I'm going to choose the data pipeline. And what we're going to just do is we're going to just give it a name. And we'll just call this NYC pipeline.
And while Tommy's doing that, I'm going to jump in here and I'm going to grab the tutorial that we're following along. This is a tutorial that is provided by Microsoft. Even the data set that we're talking about here is also publicly available and able for you to use yourself. So in the chat window and in the description of this video, you'll also see that there is a link to this tutorial just in case you want to follow along on your own later at a different point in time.
Perfect. So when you create your pipeline, you're brought to the first screen, which is really similar to how Power BI is when you open a report. And you can see we have a few options for us. We can either add a pipeline activity if you're familiar with Data Factory and how that works. But what we're actually going to do is we're actually going to use the wizard, the template.
Real quick, Tommy, before you jump into the demo, let's just quickly go through some of the UI here. That this is new UI that people have seen. Let's just go quickly through the different ribbons we have at the top here. So we have the home ribbon. This is the ribbon here at the very top of the screen. We're going to go valid. We could potentially validate the pipeline if we build one. We could run it. If we want to schedule it on a cadence, a weekly or monthly cadence, we could set that up. If you want to see the history of this pipeline when it ran, and then you'll notice here to the right-hand side, there are other activities that you would use inside the creation of pipelines: copy data, data flows, notebooks, lookup activities. So this is really a fundamental of what's happening inside the pipelines. You'll also notice there are other ribbons as well at the very upper left-hand corner: activities, run, and view. So let's just quickly click through those before we jump right into the demo. Activities, these are all the actions you can build when you're doing a pipeline. So again, we're not going to go into all of them right now. The idea is there's many different actions you can do to make a pipeline run. And then if you click on the run ribbon, in the run, this is a simplified version of what you saw on the home ribbon, where you have the validate the pipeline, execute or run the pipeline, or look at the history of when the pipeline ran.
And what you'll probably want to do with your pipelines too is also schedule them. It's something that sometimes they'll be one-off, but other times you want them to run anytime news files added. So the scheduling is a big part here as well.
The last ribbon we have is the view ribbon. And in the view ribbon, you'll just see that there's in every pipeline that you build, you'll notice that we won't go into it today, but there is a JSON code that describes how the pipeline runs and what things work. This is more the back end, a bit more of a pro developer level experience. We're not going to use that right now. And then you'll see on the other items, there are align and auto fit when you have multiple elements. So these are other ribbon items that are available to us. Sorry, Tommy, let's go back over to the home ribbon and let's continue on with the activities.
Yes. If you ever lose that menu, what I can actually do is I'm actually going to choose on the home ribbon the copied data, which is actually right in the middle. And you can see there's add to canvas or use the copy assistant. So I'm going to choose the copy assistant. It's going to bring up a UI for me. And it's actually the first thing it's going to ask me to do is what source are we going to copy from? There's a few samples as well that Microsoft provides. But what we're actually going to do is we're going to choose.
Yeah, I want to jump in here real quick, Tommy. I want to show there is a lot of copy activities. So we're going to use one specific thing. We're not going to cover all these different copy activities. You can use OData. You get things from Snowflake. You want to go from a data warehouse, SQL, Postgres. There's a lot of other activities here. And if you look at Azure Data Factory, there's actually a ton more inside Azure Data Factory as well. So I would imagine as Microsoft continues to build on this, there's going to be more and more copy activities that come across here. So you'll be able to see a lot more additional copy activities in the future. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there. Go ahead, Tommy.
No worries. And you can see there's already the Lakehouse and the data warehouse from Microsoft Fabric already available.
Correct.
So what we're going to do is we're going to actually just choose the Azure Blob storage. And what we're going to do from here is select it, choose next. And here we're going to choose what connection. So anytime you do Azure Blob storage, you usually need to provide a URL string. In the Microsoft documentation, they have one for us. And what we're going to do is go to new connection. We're going to choose the account name or the URL. And what we're going to do is if you've already connected to a source or a system close to that, you'll see that there's some recents I have, or I can create a new connection.
Let's create a new one just to kind of show everyone how it would work from scratch. Now, also note here, the URL at the very top, this is the Blob's core sample location. You can also change the name of this. If you don't want that, if that doesn't make sense to you, if that is not easy to appear, you can go into, click out of that little copy box, Tommy. You see down there in the connection name, you can actually add whatever you want there for connection names as well. So you could actually add, public, New York taxi public sample data, right? Something like that. So you can add in there the name of this connection. So that way, when you come back to it later on, you would know what this connection looks like. Now, to be clear, this one is using an anonymous connection. We're not actually authenticating ourselves. So there will be other connections in the future that you may use that actually have authentication. You need to sign in, you need to use your organizational account, or maybe there's a secure key that you want to use there as well. So what this is really doing is this is creating a connector or connection and is able to store the credentials of the user creating the connection. So in this case, we don't have any credentials, but in reality, you would likely have some sort of credentials to access the data in a secure way.
And especially with Azure, Mike, that's a good point. There's a lot of different ways that you can connect to a storage account, whether it's using the organizational account, there may be a service principal, or some have account keys, because it also depends on what container. So for this one, at least, Microsoft was gracious enough to let it be anonymous. So we don't have to actually set the credentials. We're going to choose anonymous here. And what we're going to do is choose next. And you may get an error the first time depending, but what it actually shows us here is the first point is we actually have to list a path. We can't just connect it to the entire container as a whole. So what this error is actually asking us is really just a prompt to say, hey, you only have permissions to some of the folders in the Blob storage. So what we're going to just do is we're going to actually choose the sample container. And what we're going to do is retry. And as you see, it should work. We can see the Parquet file ready and available to us.
So Parquet file is a special format that Microsoft is using. This is an open source format. It can be available to anyone. You can click on the file here that Tommy's showing you and previewing it. You can also look at other types of file formats as well. But again, this is just a UI to show you kind of what's going on inside the data file. Parquet files are out of the scope of what we're talking about today, but the idea is you can connect to basically anything, CSV, Excel files, a lot of other stuff. It just so happens that this example is a Parquet file. And you'll also notice it looks like there's only 10 records. In reality, there's actually a lot more data in this file. So what you'll observe here, this is just a sample of what some of that data looks like.
So once we have our options, we want them, every data source or file format has their own configuration. We'll go ahead and click next. And the next thing we have to do, well, we have to say, where's the data going to go? So here we have some of the same options that we did before, Azure and also our Fabric connections, but this is where we actually want to push the data to. What we're going to do, well, let's choose a lakehouse. I'm going to go ahead and choose a lakehouse from the workspace, and I'm actually going to create a new lakehouse here. Create a new lakehouse in the workspace I'm in, and we'll call this the NYC Lakehouse. Once we have this, we'll click next. We're actually going to get our final prompt to show us, okay, just to see, are we wanting to overwrite or append? Same thing in our data flows Gen 2. And do we want to store it as a file, as a Parquet as is, or do we want to structure it as a table?
So this is really interesting. What's happening here is when we pick a table, we're actually creating our own version of a Delta table, and we're bringing the data from wherever we found it. We're basically reading the Parquet file, understanding what's inside it, and we're turning that table or that Parquet file into a Delta table. So we're actually changing the format of that file, something that we can use in Power BI and other tools as well. So we're actually doing a transform at the same time here, which is very handy. Right. If you use the files option, it will literally just copy the data in its raw form and drop the file And when you go back to the Lakehouse connector, when you see this, you'll see that there is a folder, and inside that folder will be the files that you just copied. So you can literally bring in JSON files or flat files from somewhere else. Those files can be moved into your Lakehouse, but they're not technically creating Delta tables, meaning they're not automatically added to your default data set. You can't access them in your SQL data pool because they're not Delta tables yet. The other option here that's really important to note is, do you want to append the data? Appending means every time you run this pipeline, it will always add the same data or whatever it sees at the end of your table. So just append, append, append. We probably don't want that for this data set because this data is not changing. So in this case, we'll probably pick the overwrite option. So that way, every time we ran the pipeline, it would delete and replace, basically overwrite all the data there every time.
So Mike, and that's a really good point as well when it comes to, especially to our files. We're going to, obviously we want to structure this as a table. So let's go ahead and we're actually going to choose a certain name here, and we're going to call it bronze. And Mike, why are we calling it bronze?
Yeah, bronze is a good naming here. This is designed from Databricks, essentially. This is the Lakehouse, or they call this the medallion architecture. The bronze layer we kind of think about as the raw or the initial load of our data tables. And then as we transform our data, we maybe enrich it by making it silver and gold. But then this is very commonly known as the medallion architecture.
So perfect. So some of the use cases, some of you may be asking yourself, well, why would I ever choose the file option here? Well, think about what we can do now with the One Lake Explorer on Windows. All the files that normally go around, CSVs and Excels and JSONs that users have, we can actually pull directly from there. If people add that from their computer, just like in SharePoint or OneDrive syncing, we can actually use those in our data flows. Really straightforward.
All right,
but
excellent.
Again,
let's move on. Click next. Let's get the data copied over to our lake. And you're going to turn off the option here for transfer data start immediately, because we're going to actually do this. We're going to trigger it manually ourselves. So go ahead and click OK. Let's move on.
So we have our first action here. And what my first thing I'm always going to do, or you live in horror, is always make sure you name your actions. So I'm going to call this copy NYC. Trust me, it will help you out later. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go to my activities here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add an activity to here. You'll notice when I scroll over this action, there's a few icons that show up, a check mark or an X. Those are actually saying me if it fails or if it's successful, what should we do next? In this case, I'm going to choose all my activities. I'm actually going to go here to where you can see there is a Office Outlook action. I'm going to select this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect if the data flow pipeline fails, and connect it directly to Outlook. So this is actually going to say if the pipeline fails, now we're actually going to send an email. And let's go ahead and let's configure this. We'll go to our settings here, and you see we get a to subject and body.
Very easy.
Yeah, very easy. So I'll go ahead and email myself.
Now, as Tommy's filling out the information here, what we can do here is we can actually automate the ingestion or bring in pipeline parameters. And what Tommy's going to do now is he's going to add some information into the subject line, which will help him build out a pattern by which he can then have the pipeline name or other things that automatically appear here. Now, another thing, these are concepts that come with pipelines. If we click out of this action item here, so Tommy's setting up the email of where this will go to. Tommy will then click in the main area there, Tommy. What happens is a pipeline itself has things like parameters and or variables as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a quick little variable to name this pipeline. And that way later on in the email body, we can use these variables to rename or add information directly into the pipeline, so the email body. So we can set up basically common parameters we want to reuse. So here, Tommy's typing in the pipeline name, and we're going to actually add a text string here that's going to be used later on. Okay, now that we're done with this, now that we have the variable established, we can go back into our Office Outlook action. And then now in our subject line, we can actually add dynamic content. So in adding dynamic content, we can then pick up that variable we made earlier, and then it'll be part of the email string or the main subject body of when this email was able to be completed.
Yes, and this is part of the pipeline expression builder that's been part of Data Factory and Synapse. So there's a few functions and variables that you get a little familiar with. But what we're going to do here is we're going to do a really simple one for our subject. We're going to do something that looks a bit familiar to everyone, a concatenate. And what we're going to do is just basically say our first is going to be a static string.
So the concatenate function that Tommy's writing here is concatenate is a function that comes from the Azure Data Factory features or from basically pipelines. You'll also notice down below, there's actually a series of functions that are available to us that will allow us to have that information as well.
So let's go ahead and do this. We'll say our concatenate notice, and then what we're going to actually choose is we're going to choose our variable.
Click on variables, pipeline name.
And we're going to simply just end it with failed. We can close this up, and we basically now we'll always have substitute that in. We'll click OK. So that's our subject, and I'm going to make it a little quicker for our body and do the same idea here. We'll choose our body here, and we'll do dynamic content. We'll go ahead and just add in here everything that is basically going to just show us that the notice of the pipeline that this pipeline failed, and we can actually see that there's a parameter here that is actually the trigger time, the time that this pipeline was triggered. So depending on what actions you're using, you'll have different parameters or outputs of every action.
So I'm going to answer a quick question here from the chat just very briefly. Mark asks, is there a best practice for isolating the medallion architecture in the different sources? So today, the way lakehouses are made right now, there is no ability to make folders inside your lakehouse for bronze, silver, and gold. When I think about a lake house, I think the lake house name itself would make sense. If you're going to do a full medallion architecture, bronze, silver, and gold, it does kind of make sense to name each of your lake houses the type of medallion data you're looking at. So I can, in my mind, or my mental model here is, I think of one lake as the entire lake, the entire data in my entire company. When I think about a lake house, I think a lake house like a database. It's a database that contains tables in it. I can put files and I can put tables inside that lake house. So if you're trying to do medallion architecture right now, based on what I see Microsoft building today, again, this is in preview, things will likely change. But right now, if you're going to build bronze, silver, gold medallion architectures, I would make a lake house for each of those elements, and you'd have then bronze, silver, and gold lake houses for those medallion areas. And that way you can then regulate access to one or multiple layers of that data upstream. So we'll have to come back to that a little bit more. There's more implications around that about security and how that would work inside the ability to be able to share or not share those lakehouse elements through users inside your Power BI environment. Sorry, Tommy, back to your demo.
Yeah, Mike, I think we're near the end here. So what our final action, once we're ready to run our pipeline, we're going to go ahead and go to the run ribbon. And we can see here that really what we can do is, I think everything looks good to me. I should look good, right?
Oh, it's still validating, but they're saving on the left-hand side.
It's taking a bit, isn't that?
We'll let it think here for a second. See if it will capture this. What should happen, and again, hopefully we have a little bit of baking thing here while Tommy's figuring things out. What should happen is this should save the pipeline, and it should then allow it to execute the pipeline, and then we will run the pipeline, and what it will do is then it'll go grab that data from the Blob storage account and bring it through. What happens if you refresh our page, Tommy? Does it work?
So let's try it. Let's go ahead and do that. So let's go out and we'll go back to our pipeline.
Refresh the page. Hopefully our pipeline will work here. Assuming everything goes well.
Assuming everything goes well.
It deleted everything. So let's just do the quick copy activity, Tommy. Go back there, just make our copy data activity. It did not save it, and so we'll just try it.
But that's okay because we have a backup.
We already did it once before. So Tommy already ran this pipeline. This one should have already been run. So what's happening now on this one, we've already have a pre-baked version of this. It will then go copy the data. It will then produce the data tables inside our lakehouse environment. And Tommy, were you able to run this one already? Do you know?
Yeah, so I was looking at this, and I believe this has the same issue as before. We'll do everything with our overwrite. We have our sources. Mike, do you happen to have one up?
I do. So we have a third baked cake just in case something went wrong in Fabric. So let's show you the full item here as well. So I also have one as well in my end. So let me just pull open my environment. Let me just quickly share my screen here so you can see what we're looking at. And we'll do a quick hot swap here. All right, let's see if we can get that going again. All right, here's my screen. We have made a pipeline. So here's my pipeline. This is our pipeline made inside our lakehouse. Let's go here to our New York taxi pipeline. I'll open this up. You'll see here I have a very simple copy activity. And this one has already run previously. So if I ran it again, I'll just click the word run here. It will then run the pipeline. It will then show you an output of the pipeline as well. From that output pipeline, it'll queue up the information, and then it will take it a number of seconds to go to that location in Blob storage. It'll then grab the information and copy it down for us. So give it a moment here. It should, if I need to see this data, you'll notice here the duration is 0 seconds right here. There's an option on the screen to do the little recycle button. The recycle button will then, if I keep clicking this, you'll see that it keeps upticking in number of seconds. It takes it about 59 seconds to copy all the data. And once it completes here, it'll then let us have that information for us. While this is refreshing, I think I can sneak over here to where the lake house is having the information. I'll give it just a couple more seconds here. It shouldn't take us too long. Hopefully it'll finish here just momentarily. There we go. We finished. So in 55 seconds, we were able to complete the copy activity. If I click on this copy activity, this is something that's very unique to Data Factory or pipelines. You'll see that there are a couple items here. There's an input, an output, and the sunglasses, meaning what is the summary of what occurred. So if I click on the details or the sunglasses here, or I guess it would be glasses or whatever, it'll then tell you all the details that occurred in the lake. Here's the source. I came from Blob storage. I copied 49 megabytes. I created it in my lakehouse, and now the data written was 36 megabytes. So I was able to take the data from one side and move it over. I was able to move 1.5 million rows in about a minute, a little less than that. So total duration of copy activity took about 45 seconds. So that is the breakdown of what occurred during this copy activity. Now that we have this done, we can actually go back up to our lakehouse for our New York taxi data and actually observe the table. So I'll go back to New York taxi. I'll go back into our Learn Fabric demo workspace. We'll go down to where we have our created New York taxi lakehouse down here at the bottom. And then if I go into this lakehouse, I'll be able to see those tables that I just created. I'm going to click into New York taxi. And there we go. We have our bronze table. And our bronze table automatically comes with data types for us because Parquet files define the data types for us automatically. And there we go. We have our table created. We have all of our columns in here. We have latitude, longitudes, the trip distance, all kinds of other fun things. And then once we have this, we can go back over to our workspace again. We will also notice when I created my lakehouse, from the lakehouse, it automatically made me a SQL endpoint. And it also made me a data set that I can go look at because this table, since it's a part of my lakehouse, it's automatically added to my default data set. So clicking in New York Taxi data set, again, it exposes my tables. It shows me everything here. And then I can go into my create a report. And I'm going to be lazy for now. It's not going to create a great report, but I'm just going to auto create a report. So I'm going to click on auto create. And then I'll even see if I can pre-select some data here. Let's see if we can select fair amount. And let's maybe collect, let's do the trip distance. And maybe we care about the month, something like these are the columns that we care about. So by me selecting columns that I care about, the report tries to build out some reporting for me that will kind of use those data columns and bring them together for me. So I can now see the total trip distance by passenger count, number of passengers we have. So the longer, in this example up here, when the passenger count is less, we have longer trips. So there's kind of a sweet spot, 1, 2, 3, and 5 passengers are taking up many of the trip distance initially. And that's it. We've gone fully from creating a pipeline. We loaded the data into our lakehouse. From the lakehouse, we auto-created a report. So kind of the full solution here around working with pipelines. All right. We got the demo to work. It was a little bit buggy. Again, everything's in preview, so bear with us while we learn this together. But we appreciate your time today. Thank you all for tuning in for our Learn Fabric series. There's more to come. We're going to continue diving in deeper on the pipelines and other elements here that are going to help you build better data engineering processes inside your organization. Thank you all very much, and we appreciate your time. We'll see you next time.